The Bible weighed more than I remembered. Not because of the pages. Those had grown soft at the edges from decades of his thumbs, but because grief is heavier than leather. I opened it at the place where a ribbon had always rested, a faded strip of blue that had held his sermons still on Saturday nights. The house was quiet the way a field is quiet after harvest. Stripped hollow, full of echoes that do not belong to now. Somewhere a furnace sighed. Somewhere, too, the past shifted, and a thin piece of metal slid from the gutter of Ecclesiastes into my open hand. It was a key, small and old, stamped with a number instead of a brand, its teeth oddly shallow, its bow smooth from use. A thing you would recognize by touch alone if you had been carrying it for years. My father had never misplaced anything. He tracked wrenches like they were birds and folded receipts to the exact width of his wallet. If this key fell from the Bible, it had been placed there on purpose. And if it had been placed there on purpose, then it had been meant to be found, but not too soon. The grief counselor says bereavement warps time. The mind hikes trails it hasn't walked in years. She's not wrong. As the key pressed a crescent into my palm, I heard my father's night voice again. The one he saved for late repairs and late prayers, the careful register of a man who loved instructions and believed in covenants. He used to say, hiding and keeping aren't the same thing. Hiding is fear, keeping is stewardship. The Bible was the one place he trusted to keep what he could not bring himself to say aloud. I turned the key over. It had no modern shine, only the burnish of touch, and a faint scent of brass and oil that reminded me of the workbench in the garage. I listened absurdly for a sound from the house, the creak of a hinge that would confess, the hush of air behind a wall, but all I heard was my own breath. I traced the blue ribbon back to its page. He had underlined a single verse with the lightest hand. A time to keep, and a time to cast away. My throat tightened in that way grief teaches you. Sudden, decisive, impossible to swallow. If there was a time to keep this secret, had he also decided there would be a time to let it go? And why now, when he was beyond questions? The oldest places in a house know the most. I walked the perimeter like I'd seen him walk fence lines, looking for what didn't belong. Floorboards talk. Paint remembers. In the mudroom, below the shelf where his boots once waited like patient dogs, I found a small, waist-high cabinet I had never opened. We had stacked umbrellas there each spring without thinking. It had never needed a key. The lock was round and shallow, the kind you buy at the hardware store with a shrug. The key from the Bible didn't fit. Not even close. A key is a map with edges. I let it guide my hand. The garage was still perfumed with sawdust and winter, the long flat smell of concrete that keeps whatever falls upon it. His pegboard looked like the chalk outline of a life. Silhouettes of tools still pinned by habit. Little nails waiting for wrenches that would never hang there again. On the benchtop lay a folded cloth. Inside was a set of small file cards bound with a rubber band gone brittle. The top card held a list, dates, places, box numbers, written in his disciplined block letters. Between the entries, a tiny mark repeated. A blue dash, the same blue as the ribbon in the Bible. Mind like a ledger, heart like a vault. The counselor also said, don't go hunting for answers when your body is begging you to rest. But rest is a luxury for those who aren't haunted by omissions. I slid the cards into my pocket and felt the key sit next to them, warm now from my skin. If he left me the beginning of a path, I would walk it. I owed him that much. I owed myself that much more. Before I take you further, a quick request. Because these stories take care to tell and care to hear. If you're new here, tap subscribe and turn on the bell. I share true, complicated legacies like this one every week, where houses speak and families whisper, and the smallest clue changes everything. Now back to the key. Night comes heavy in an empty house. And that's when rooms admit what daylight refuses. I made tea and spread the cards on the kitchen table. Each line carried a date, then an abbreviated place, then a number with a dash. July 14, 1993. RS 313-12. 2 de febrero de 1998 HL 9-07. Some had asterisks, some a faint check mark in pencil. I recognized initials the way you recognize old grocery stores by ghost letters on brick. The banker who came to our church once a quarter. The neighbor who lost a barn in a storm. A cousin who left town without forwarding addresses. Were these debts? Donations? Repairs he promised? My father kept his public generosity quiet. He'd press bills into callous palms and say, "Pay me back by paying the next man forward." But these looked more like claims than gifts. And why file numbers? The blue dash next to each entry. It was a page marker, I realized. Not the Bible's ribbon, but a librarian's habit. And then I saw it on card 3. A street name I knew better than my own, followed by a 4-digit code that matched the tiny brass plate on a post office box we had visited every Saturday morning when I was small. Our ritual: orange juice and a newspaper from the diner, then the slow walk to box 1207. We hadn't used it in years. He told me we'd closed it when paper gave way to screens. But this card said otherwise. Memory has a door you don't see until it's already swinging. The key in my pocket suddenly weighed as much as truth. Post office boxes don't take house keys. They take tiny flats shaped like question marks. Still, a code is a key. And a box is a room if it has a door and a number. I put the cards back in their cloth, turned off the kitchen light, and stood at the threshold to the hall. The shadows there were old companions. On the left, the den where he fell asleep in his chair with sermons half memorized. On the right, the closed door of his bedroom, which I had not opened since the hospice nurse stripped the bed. Straight ahead, the front door with its 3 brass locks he oiled twice a year as if security were a sacrament. Every path led inward. At the hall's end, a floorboard rose a hair, barely enough to snag a sock, just enough to suggest interference. He used to say, "A house tells on you." I knelt and pressed. The wood gave with a small sigh and lifted at the edge, revealing a shallow void the size of a loaf pan. Inside lay a single envelope wrapped in wax paper. The wax had the faint bloom of age, like fruit left on a cold porch. I unwrapped it with the same careful objection I would bring to a courtroom, should one day require it. The envelope was addressed in his hand, to me, with a date written 4 weeks before he died. No stamp, no seal. Only a line across the flap and the same tiny blue dash in the corner. I opened it. Inside was not a letter, but a photocopy of a deed. Not to this house, which I knew had been paid off the year I left for college, but to a parcel of land 2 counties over, a narrow rectangle bordering a creek with a name I recognized from summer drives. The deed bore his name and one other. Initials only, a co-owner redacted in ink so heavy it shone. Beneath the deed, a small claim check from a storage facility I could place by the area code. The number on the claim check was oddly familiar, too, until I realized it matched one of the entries on the first file card. He had left me a key that didn't open anything I could see, a set of numbers that were not addresses but coordinates of another life, and a map drawn in the only language he trusted to keep silent. Ledgers, stamps, proofs. It was a scavenger hunt designed by a man who did not believe in games. Outside, wind moved through the maple like fabric torn slowly. I sat on the floor with the envelope open on my knees and understood something I had not been ready to admit. This was not about inheritance. This was about confession by proxy. He had done what he could not bring himself to say by leaving me a trail even the most reluctant daughter would feel compelled to follow. The tea had gone cold. The key had warmed to my skin. The first card, folded to show the post office box code, waited like a breath I'd been holding for years. There is a rule I have learned in houses where secrets are kept. The thing you search for is never the first thing you find. But you must begin anyway. In the morning, I would go to the post office, and to the storage facility if they would see me, and I would carry the key like a promise. And if I discovered that everything I loved about him had a twin I did not, I would hold both truths in the same hand, and let them press crescents into my palm until they marked me honest. The key sat on my palm all night, a cold, stubborn period at the end of a sentence I couldn't read. By morning, I'd decided the only way to make sense of it was to follow its logic. Keys exist because somewhere a lock is waiting. After coffee I couldn't taste and a shower that did nothing to chase the funeral air from my skin, I drove to the old post office on Maple. My father's route for 3 decades, the brick box with a flag out front that he used to call the town's second heartbeat. I hadn't been inside since I mailed him a birthday card the year I moved away. The bell still made the same small apology when the door opened. It smelled like dust and paper and the faint tang of toner. Behind the counter, Mrs. Keene, older, softer hair, a cloud of white. Looked up and blinked as if I had been conjured by the bell. "You're Daniel's girl," she said, not a question. I nodded, unsure whether my face still wore the grief that had become a mask. "We were sorry to hear." She studied the key I set down between us. Brass short, the number 314 stamped into its head. Recognition flickered across her features, then smoothed away like someone ironing a wrinkle they wish weren't there. "Boxes are along the back wall," she said, voice steady. "If you need anything, well, you know where I am." The wall of boxes was an old neighborhood of doors, each a tiny silence. I found 314 2/3 down, eye level, the brass dull from 1,000 ghosts of hands. The key fit with a resistance that felt personal. I had to press my thumb hard into the ridges and turn until something inside relented. The door swung open. Inside sat a brown paper parcel, the kind bound with string that makes a sound like a low violin when you pull it. No return address, no stamp, just my first name, inked in my father's slow, careful hand, Eleanor. Seeing it was like being called from another room. For a second I wanted to shut the box and pretend none of this had happened. Instead, I lifted the parcel out and carried it to a table under the grim portrait of a past postmaster, whose eyes followed a little too well. I didn't tear. I unwrapped. The string came free with the knot still intact, a habit Dad taught me. Leave things as you found them unless you must change them. And the paper folded back to reveal a black plastic case lined with gray foam, the kind used for cameras or instruments. It was heavier than it looked. The latches clicked with a clipped, military neatness, and when I lifted the lid, I forgot how to breathe. Inside was a microcassette recorder, Sony old, the kind my father had carried on his route when he took oral histories from the war widows who never learned to type. Next to it, 6 tiny tapes, each labeled in neat block letters. Maple/Night, River/Attic, Ledger/1959, Barn/Blue Door, Pastor/Quiet Do Not Play. Tucked into the foam. A short letter on thin stationery. The watermark from St. Matthew's Church showing faintly when I lifted it toward the light. "Ellie, if you're reading this, I have done something I swore I never would. I left a burden instead of a story. You know I've always believed in receipts. People lie, paper doesn't. 30 years ago, something happened in this town that we all agreed to misremember. We did it for what we called peace, but it never bought quiet, just interest. The first 4 tapes are a map. The 5th is proof. The 6th, his handwriting faltered here, is for when you think you understand. If I'm gone, it means I could not finish what I started without hurting you while I lived. I won't ask forgiveness, only diligence. Trust but verify. Follow the labels. And if any door opens too easily, it's not the right door. Dad." I stared at Do Not Play until the letters felt like a dare. Curiosity is a living thing. It warms its hands over the fire of your fear and waits. I slipped Maple/Night into the recorder instead and pressed play. Static, then the humid throb of crickets. A whisper of my father's breath. Midnight August, his voice, younger than it should have been, softer. The version of him I knew before his lungs turned thin as paper. Footfalls at the corner of Maple and 3rd again. Same pattern, 3 pause 2 pause 1. No one on the sidewalk. Porch light at the Livingston place flickers when the steps stop. Note, the lullaby again. The tape hissed, and from somewhere in that grain of sound, a woman's voice rose, off-key, distant, the bones of a melody I couldn't place. The hairs along my neck stood at attention. I stopped the tape. The room regained its ordinary dimensions. The hum of a vending machine, a cough from behind the counter, the scrape of my chair, but something in me had stretched to match what I had heard and wouldn't quite return. I loaded Ledger/1959 and listened to my father reading names. Receipts missing from Shull Hardware. Dates don't reconcile with bank deposits. Pastor's car out back after midnight 3 Saturdays running. Ask Keen about night window. The chain tightened. Keen, the same woman behind the counter. I glanced over. She was pretending to sort certified letters. Eyes just slightly too focused on nothing. It would have been easy to take the case and go home. Build a nest of questions there in private. Instead, I walked back to the counter with the recorder in plain view. "Mrs. Keen," I said, using the voice I reserve for students in office hours when I know they're smarter than their grade. Did my father ever rent this box for himself? A pause long enough to count. No, she said. He rented it for the church. Said sometimes people needed a place to put truths they couldn't say out loud. She met my eyes then, and the years fell away. I saw the woman who saved me bootleg peppermint sticks from the office drawer at Christmas. The one who watched the street more closely than anyone. Whatever you found, she added softer, be careful who you think you're protecting. I left with the case cradled in my arms like contraband and a map forming behind my eyes. Maple and 3rd at midnight. The river attic. Whatever that meant. A ledger that didn't add up. A blue door on a barn. A pastor who practiced being quiet. And a tape I was not supposed to play. Hooks were everywhere, snagging the part of me that wanted to stop. And the part that had already stepped forward. If you're still with me, you know the feeling. When a story you didn't ask for insists on becoming yours. Before we go any further, do me a favor. Subscribe so you don't miss what I'm about to open. We're past the point of pretending this ends with one key. Back in the car, I set the recorder on the passenger seat and turned the ignition. The radio caught a talk show mid-sentence. Something about how grief rewires the brain's risk center. I laughed once sharp. My risk center wasn't rewired. It had always been my father. Now the circuit had to close another way. I checked the time. 11:37 p.m. would arrive sooner than I wanted. And aimed the car toward Maple and 3rd, where footsteps no one owned had apparently kept my father company for years. The sun slid behind the water tower. The town folded itself into evening. And for the first time since the funeral, I felt something that wasn't sorrow. It wasn't hope either. It was the click a lock makes when a key is still hovering, not yet turned, the promise that something is about to give. The first time I parked at the corner of Maple and 3rd, the dashboard clock flipped to 2:17 a.m. exactly. An hour my body remembered from those last nights with Dad, when his breathing turned to counting and his counting turned to prayer. The town slept under a thin frost. Porch lights were halos without saints. I killed the engine and let the quiet lean in. There it was, the kind of silence that isn't empty at all. The kind that presses against your ribs like a held note. Before we go any further, if stories that braid mystery with memory speak to you, subscribe. You won't want to miss what this key opens, or what it refuses to. I stepped out, breath fogging, shoes scuffing the granular sparkle of salt spread after yesterday's flurries. Dad's notebook rode in my coat pocket, the bronze key warm from my palm. The intersection was older than the blocks around it. New condos crouched behind glass rails, but the corner itself kept its original bones. A brick utility substation, a retired streetcar stop, and a mural of a river painted in blues that looked almost wet where the lamplight fell. According to Dad's notes, this was where he first heard it, footsteps, and where the lullaby began. I told myself I was here to disprove him. Grief can make clocks misbehave and footsteps out of pipes. I needed to force the ordinary back onto the world. But memory is stubborn. The nearer I came to the substation, the more the air cooled, a pocket of temperature that felt placed. I clicked on my penlight. Brick, mortar, a metal service door flush with the wall, painted city green and banded with an old latch. When my light slid across the latch, the bronze key grew heavier in my hand, as if recognizing something. A sound to my left, clean measured, not wind, not the shuffle of a raccoon. Footsteps. Slow, definite, more human than any night noise I could excuse. They approached, then stalled, then resumed, as if whoever, or whatever, was pacing undecided. I raised the light. The sidewalk was a stage without actors. And then, from behind the mural's painted river, a second sound bloomed, quiet enough to doubt, persistent enough to dare. A melody paired to its skeleton. For notes, a pause for notes again. A lullaby I knew only a shape, because Dad had hummed it when words failed him. Someone's here. I said to no one, and every hair on my arms agreed. I pressed my ear to the substation's seam. There was breathing behind that door. Or was it the low thrum of transformers layered with my own pulse? I steadied my hand and slid the key toward the latch, only to stop. The key's teeth didn't match the latch's slot. Wrong key, wrong century. But the metal responded anyway, a click, a soft give, like a magnet finding true north. The door didn't swing. The door relaxed. A small brass tag I hadn't noticed was screwed into the jamb. Enamel flaked to ghosts of letters. I rubbed the grime with my sleeve. MT 217. Maple and 3rd. 217. The time Dad wrote in the margins over and over. Some coincidences are cheap. This one felt purchased. Something shifted behind me. I turned the light, expecting empty sidewalk. Instead, the beam landed on shoe prints in the rhyme. 2 parallel tracks crossing the corner from nowhere to nowhere. As if a person had stepped out of a seam in the night, walked 5 or 6 paces, and stepped back in. The prints were fresh, edges crisp, salt crystals glittering at their lips. I crouched. The tread marks were old-fashioned, thin heel, narrow toe, wrong for the joggers and work boots this neighborhood now wore. The lullaby deepened. Not louder, nearer. I realized with a chill that it wasn't leaking from the building. It rose from below, like air moving up a throat. Streetcar rails once ran under maple. There are maintenance corridors in old cities that never die. They just forget why they were built. Dad had spent 30 years as a lineman. He knew the city's circulatory system better than its mapmakers. What else had he known? I tapped the door, 3 times, then 2, copying the odd pattern Dad had scribbled in the margin beside this address. On the last tap, the latch unlatched itself with the polite resignation of a hotel door at checkout. A breath of deeper cold slid over my knuckles. I should have called someone, police, city works, anyone, but mystery has its own gravity. I set my shoulder, and the door inched open. Dark. Then a strip of service light flickered to life a dozen feet down. Enough to sketch a stairwell that fell into the earth. A handrail rusted to the hue of dried blood. Old posters ossified to the walls. City Transit. Mind the gap. Everything smelled of wet stone and old paper. The footsteps resumed, now unmistakably on stairs, descending, ascending, I couldn't tell. The melody braided itself into them. A call and response for one voice. I slipped inside and let the door rest against the jamb, not shut, not open. The key ticked in my pocket like a small heart. 1 step. 2. The cold intensified, but with it came another sensation I couldn't label at first and then could not ignore. Recognition. The cadence of those steps was the cadence of my father's when he was thinking hard. Head slightly bowed, right foot landing a fraction before the left, as if he were stepping around an idea he didn't want to bruise. On the 4th stair a word skated across my mind that I didn't invite. Forgiveness. I tightened my grip on the rail. I wasn't here to forgive. I was here to know. Halfway down, my light caught a metal box bolted to the wall. Olive drab, stenciled letters. Locker C, issue keys. A keyhole sat beneath a hinged cover plate. I lifted it. The profile was notched, precisely the inverse of the bronze key in my pocket. I hesitated, hearing Dad say in his careful voice, "If you start a thing, finish it." Then I slid the key home. The moment it turned, the lullaby cut off. In the silence that followed, something else woke. Deeper than music, older than the city. A mechanism unceasing after years of waiting. Somewhere below, bolts slid. Somewhere above, a faint bell chimed midnight 12 at 2:19 a.m. And from the dark at the base of the stairs, a new light bloomed, blue-white, surgical, deliberate, illuminating a corridor that had no business being there, and a name stenciled on the far door I had not spoken in years, but carried in my mouth like a healed burn. I took one more step, until the letters sharpened. That was when I understood why Dad hid the key in a Bible and why he wrote, "Do not trust daylight," across this page. The light spilling from the bottom of the stairwell wasn't natural. It had the color of something manufactured to imitate safety. Too clean, too precise, like the glow of an operating room you've only seen from behind glass. I hesitated, one hand on the rail, the other clutching the key that no longer felt like metal but memory. The air changed as I reached the final step. The scent of dust and ozone thickened, cut with something faintly sweet. Lilies, maybe. Dad's funeral had smelled like lilies. I whispered his name, and it came back to me, warped, like someone repeating it from behind a door. The corridor was narrow, concrete-lined, and ran longer than the dimensions of the substation should have allowed. Pipes ran along the ceiling, humming faintly. There was a rhythm in that hum. A pulse that almost matched the beat of footsteps from before. I walked slowly, keeping my light trained on the floor. Halfway down, the walls changed. The raw concrete gave way to tile, faded sea green, cracked with time. Then photographs began to appear, old, water-stained pictures taped along the wall in no pattern. Most were blank from age, but a few still showed faces. Workers in heavy coats, a woman holding a clipboard, a boy on a bicycle in front of the substation. None of them were strangers. Every face was one I'd seen in Dad's albums, people he'd sworn were just co-workers. At the end of the hallway stood a single door. White. Too clean for the grime around it. Above it, a flickering bulb pulsed like a heartbeat. A metal plate read, "Property of the Maple Project." The paint around it had bubbled, as if the wall itself had tried to reject it. I pressed my ear to the door. Silence. Then faintly a voice, one I couldn't mistake. My father's voice. "Don't open what you can't close." It wasn't memory. It was present, low, deliberate, almost amused. I stepped back, breath shallow, heartbeat scraping against my ribs. Then I noticed something near the doorknob. Fingerprints burned into the paint, 5 pale shapes like scars of heat. Curiosity is cruel. It dresses itself as courage. I turned the knob. Inside, light. A long room filled with desks, each stacked with dusty reels of magnetic tape. Typewriters, file boxes, and photographs of streets, houses, and power lines. On the far wall, a corkboard. Strings pinned between clippings, some marked with dates that didn't exist yet. And there, center frame, a photograph of me. Not recent. Younger, maybe 10 years old. Holding a small silver cross in front of the same house I'd grown up in. My handwriting across the bottom. First day of school. I hadn't written that in decades. The chill in my chest became a question too heavy to breathe around. Why did my father have this here? Why was my life pinned among his secrets? I heard a rustle behind me. Turning, I saw movement. Not shape, not person, just a shift in the air, as though something had leaned forward to look. The nearest tape recorder clicked on by itself. The reels spun, hissing static before a voice, low and unmistakable, filled the room. "If you're hearing this, you found the key." It was him. Calm. Methodical. Recording every word as though expecting me. "I told you once that the past doesn't die, it reorganizes. If you open the corridor, don't follow the sound. It's not me. It's what I left behind." A mechanical whir. Then silence. My throat closed. The bulb overhead flickered again. And in its brief dark, something metallic glinted near the floor. A hatch. A trapdoor sealed with bolts. The paint around it was chipped from the inside, as though something had tried to get out. The same lullaby from Maple Street, slower now, distorted, began to hum through the pipes. I knelt, pressing my palm to the hatch. It vibrated faintly, like something breathing beneath metal. My name echoed through the corridor, soft, patient, and wrong. I stumbled backward. Hand on the wall, heart in my throat. On the corkboard, one last photo had fallen loose, catching the dim light. It showed the substation, same as now, but in the window, a reflection. My father's face smiling faintly, and behind him me older watching him. I didn't remember that photo being taken. When I looked again, the reflection was gone. The pipes overhead groaned, and the door slammed shut behind me. That was when I realized the corridor wasn't built to keep people out. It was built to keep something in. I don't know how long I stood in that corridor. The sound of my own pulse filling the space where my father's voice had been. The air had thickened, vibrating with something mechanical, almost like breath dragged through a fan. The hatch below my feet rattled once, then stilled as though waiting. I told myself it was just pipes, just pressure release. But that lie didn't survive long. The edges of the hatch were rusted, but freshly disturbed. The bolts were tight, yet polished from use. Someone recently had opened it. I swept my flashlight across the metal and found tiny scratches, circular, like fingernails scraping from below. That was the moment fear stopped being abstract. Still I crouched, because curiosity has its own gravity, and mine had already pulled me too far down to turn back. I pressed my palm to the hatch. It was cold, but beneath that chill, something faintly pulsed, once, twice. A rhythm that wasn't mine. I should have run. Instead I whispered, "Dad." The word didn't echo. It was absorbed. The air swallowed it whole. I reached for the nearest wrench on one of the workbenches and set it against the first bolt. It resisted like bone, then turned with a soft metallic cry. The others followed, 1, 2, 3, each exhaling a hiss of trapped air. When I lifted the hatch, a gust of cold so dense it burned rolled out, smelling of iron and damp stone. Below me was a narrow staircase, wood not metal, descending into pure dark. The steps were coated in dust, except for one thing. Footprints. Bare ones. Small. And that was when I realized the music was coming from down there. The lullaby again, slower, warped, humming between frequencies, rising and fading like it was breathing. I thought of the tapes, the photographs, the project name. Maple. My father hadn't worked for the power company at all, not really. He'd built something under it. I descended. The air thickened as I went down, each step groaning beneath my weight. The key in my pocket grew warm again, and the closer I came to the bottom, the more I could feel its vibration, synchronized with the sound below. When my shoes touched the floor, my light caught the edge of a glass wall. Behind it, an observation chamber. Machinery hummed softly, wires curling like veins across the floor. In the center sat a chair, bolted to the ground, surrounded by medical monitors long dead. And someone had written on the glass backward, so it could only be read from inside. Forgive me. My light flickered. The hum deepened. A figure moved, reflected, not real, but detailed enough to make my knees lock. It was a man, standing behind me, shoulders stooped, the outline unmistakable. Dad. The reflection didn't move. Its mouth opened slightly, as if trying to form words, but no sound came. I turned nothing. The room was empty. The reflection lingered an instant longer, then dissolved into static haze. I pressed the flashlight to the glass, peering inside the chamber. More photographs lined the walls, all of people I didn't recognize, except one. A woman with long silver hair, holding a child. Me. Beneath the photo scribbled in black marker. Second subject, unaware. My breath caught. I stumbled back, hitting a cabinet. Something fell to the ground, a reel-to-reel tape. Its label read, Maple Record number 217. When I picked it up, I noticed another small key taped to the back. Smaller than the first, but made of the same bronze. My hands shook as I pulled the tape recorder closer and threaded it. Static. Then his voice again. If you found this, you're not safe above or below. They'll come when they hear the hum. You were supposed to stay out. The tape crackled. Then faintly breathing. Not from the recording, behind me. Slow, ragged, close. I turned, light shaking, and saw the glass fogging over from the inside. A handprint bloomed against it, adult-sized, trembling, pressing outward. Another joined it, smaller, right beside the first. The hum became a chorus now, layers of pitch, mechanical and human, overlapping like voices through water. The glass pulsed once, then twice. Cracks spidered out from the handprints. And then through the web of fractures, something looked back at me. It had my father's eyes. And mine. The cracks webbing across the glass held for a heartbeat longer than my courage did. I took a step back, one more, then stopped because running would only postpone the truth that had already found me. The smaller handprint slid downward, leaving a damp comet tail. The larger pressed once, firm, deliberate, then lifted. The humming eased, as if the room itself were exhaling after a held breath. I forced the beam to steady and searched for something I could control. Cabinets, clipboards, boxes of spooled tape. Names typed on brittle labels. Donor log, protocol maple, session notes. My father's handwriting spidered through margins, a tense, slanted script I knew from grocery lists and birthday cards. Here, though, the pen had bitten hard enough to emboss the page. Words like attenuation, imprint, transference appeared again and again, orbiting one phrase underlined until the paper scarred. Echo child. I wanted to tear the page out and pretend it didn't fit me, but there was no pretending left. The smaller bronze key I'd found on tape 217 matched a lock set into a steel drawer beneath the observation window. It turned with a reluctant click, and a refrigerated breath crept out, the whisper of long-idle coolant. Inside lay a grid of slim folders and 3 plastic vials, each sealed with parafilm and labeled with dates that straddled my birth year. The vials held nothing I could name, dull flecks in clear gel, like filings taken from a bell. A card taped to the drawer. Resonance samples. Keep below 5 degrees Celsius. I grabbed a folder marked Maple. Summary for external counsel. Whoever the external was, the tone was the voice you use when you're preparing to be disbelieved. The summary was clinical at first, then personal in a way that made my skin prickle. Objective. Attenuate traumatic memory signatures via controlled acoustic entrainment. Migrate trauma load from primary subject into a constructed echo capable of dispersal through non-destructive resonance. Layman's note. We can build a safe double for the worst a mind can't hold. Teach the double to carry it so the person can live. Ethical breach acknowledged. We used kinship proximity to stabilize the echo. We used my daughter. My pulse became the only metronome in the world. The summary mapped it like a blueprint. Sound rather than electricity. A lullaby rather than a voltage spike. That song I had heard, recorded and modulated, pulsed into the chamber while the primary subject relived what needed to be lightened. In early trials, the echoes were unstable, disintegrating like mist. With familial coupling, the echo persisted, taking, carrying, dissolving. The note in the margin next to that line was only 2 words. It works. Under that, in smaller letters, a confession. But at a cost I did not calculate. Footsteps again. This time unmistakably above me, muted by concrete and age. I froze. A soft rattle followed, like a chain dragged once across stone. Then silence that felt intentional. I killed my flashlight instinctively, stood in the nearly black room with only the panel's pilot light a distant ember, and listened until the silence developed shapes. Nothing moved. The house had returned to its old trick of being empty in a way that watched you. I turned the light back on and found a second hatch I'd missed, set into the floor beneath the chair. Smaller, newer screws. No look. Every instinct told me to leave it. But curiosity had already committed the crime. The rest was evidence collection. The hatch lifted easier than the first. It revealed a shallow well lined in lead foil and foam. A cache designed to hold sound the way thermoses hold heat. Inside lay a handheld recorder, military gray, with a built-in speaker and a single stubborn switch. Taped to it was a square of paper. If you must know, let it be the version I intended you to hear. The switch refused me once, twice, then yielded with a dry click. A faint hiss. Then my father's voice, not the corridor version filtered by death and distance, but the one I remembered from afternoons spent troubleshooting loose boards and wobbly shelves. Steady, practical, impatient with his own tenderness. If this is UL, if you found the key in my Bible and followed it, then the simple truth first. I built Maple to save people like your mother. I failed her before I met her. I wanted to build a box for pain and teach it to leave. A pause. The sound of him swallowing. When he spoke again, the steadiness had a seam. There is a reason lullabies comfort babies and make grown men cry. Sound can carry. Sound can burden. So I taught sound to carry what she could not. But echoes need anchors. They need kin. You were so small. I told myself resonance was gentler than wires. I told myself I would carry your share. I told myself 1,000 noble lies and wrote them into grant language big enough to hide in. Paper rustled. Something, his hand, tapped the recorder, close enough to blur the bass. Side effects manifest years later as phantoms. Footsteps, voices breathing you mistake for your own. These are not ghosts. They are the accumulated edges of other people's pain walking the house we built to hold it. I thought I could bleed it off in the chamber, give it a place to go that wasn't us. But resonance travels the structure. It lives in joists, in pipes, in the space behind walls. When you hear it, you are hearing my failure in motion. The hum in the room synchronized as if the recording were conducting it. The panel's small light throbbing in sync, the very air agreeing. If you have symptoms, if the house wakes you and the corridor locks itself and the lullaby starts before you remember turning anything on, then you are carrying more than your half. I am sorry. I am sorry in every tense the language allows. The next sound was one I'd never expected to be archived. My father letting himself break for 3 seconds. The breath that turned into not quite sobbing and back again into speech. I left you a way to turn it outward without breaking yourself. There's a tuning fork in the tool chest, steel, not aluminum, marked 440 but filed down to 432. Don't correct it. There are 3 vials. Choose one. And only if the noise has made you dangerous to yourself or others. Dissolve its contents in the saltwater cylinder under the chair. Strike the fork and hold it to the cylinder. The house will sing. It will be loud. It will hurt. But the echo will migrate into the oldest wood, the beam beneath the bedroom, where it will degrade and be gone by morning. Do not be in the corridor when it peaks. The recorder clicks softly, like a throat clearing. If you do nothing, maple will leak in smaller ways forever. It will tap at 3:12 a.m. It will pace. It will ask to be let in. The footsteps are requests. They are not malevolent. They are lost burdens looking for a carrier. You can keep carrying them until you disappear. Or you can end it. Silence. Then the last line, quiet, almost embarrassed. You are not an echo. You are the person I should have protected. Press stop. Leave the house for the night. Come back in the morning and build something that isn't a box. The tape went dead. The hum didn't. For a minute, I simply breathed, matching the machine's low drone until the edges of panic dulled. Then I put the recorder back in its coffin and closed the hatch with a care that felt ceremonial. When I stood, my light fell once more on the glass. The fog had cleared. No imprints. Just the ghost of the word I couldn't unknow now. Forgive, bleeding backward where it had been scrawled from the wrong side. Above me, a door I hadn't touched slammed shut. Not the corridor's lock. Something lighter. A bedroom, maybe. Or the attic I never opened. My father's architecture had started answering again, impatient that I'd paused. I looked at the vials. At the fork. At the chair. I wasn't ready to make a choice that would echo longer than sound. But I was ready to admit what the footsteps were. Not a haunting, but an inheritance. When I climbed the stairs, I left the hatch unbolted for the first time since he died. The key in my pocket vibrated once, warmth then cool. The corridor exhaled. Behind me, the humming dropped to a pitch I could carry and rose again like a tide preparing to turn. By the time I reached the main floor, dawn had broken in cautious streaks through the shutters. The house looked normal again, if you ignored how it listened. Every creak had rhythm now. Every pipe hissed in tune with a key I didn't know I knew. I brewed coffee just to hear something ordinary. But even the kettle's whistle came out warped, pitched too low, vibrating in the same strange frequency my father's recordings had used. It was as if the entire building had shifted into an instrument waiting for a player. I should have left then. But leaving wasn't escape. It would only make the house hungrier. The hum had followed me before, through hotels, through cities. That's why I'd come back here after his funeral. To the house that was still alive. The vials from the basement were heavy in my pocket. The tuning fork too, a small strip of steel shaped like decision. The recorder's warning echoed in my head. Do not be in the corridor when it peaks. I found the cylinder under the chair. A glass tube the size of a forearm, filled with what looked like brine and iron filings. The lid was sealed tight, but the salt water inside shimmered faintly, as if responding to my presence. I poured one vial in. The liquid clouded, swirling into slow motion like smoke underwater. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in seconds. The walls groaned. Then singing. Not a song. Not human. It was the house itself, every floorboard and beam trembling in harmony. The pitch rose until the air turned solid, until my lungs fought to find rhythm. The fork in my hand shook so violently it slipped, hit the cylinder, and the tone caught. Everything froze. Then the hum changed color. Not sound but sensation. It spread through the walls like blood finding capillaries again. Lights flickered, fuses popped, the hallway stretched in impossible geometry. And above the noise, beneath it, threaded through every vibration, came a voice. You shouldn't have finished it. My father's. Not from the recorder, from the structure. The timbre of his guilt in the drywall. I told you to let it die in the dark. The photographs on the corridor wall shivered, peeling away in waves, revealing layers of wallpaper that pulsed with faint light. Shapes beneath them, circuits drawn by hand, runes disguised as wiring diagrams. The air trembled again. Footsteps ran along the ceiling. Then silence. When the light stabilized, I wasn't alone. Across the room, standing by the window, was the reflection I'd seen in the glass chamber. The man with my father's eyes and my posture. His clothes were those my father wore the year before he died. The cardigan, the scuffed leather shoes. But his face flickered, shifting between ages, sometimes older, sometimes mine. "Who are you?" I asked. He tilted his head. "You know. You're just pretending not to." Then he smiled, gently, the way my father did when I'd broken something and didn't want to admit it. The echo doesn't end when the sound stops. It becomes whatever listens longest. I couldn't move. My knees trembled. He reached toward the wall, his hand passing into it, like light through smoke. The house moaned, long and low. "You carried what she couldn't. Now you'll carry me." "No." He turned, eyes full of something that wasn't malice. It was grief that had gone too long without silence. "It's not punishment, Al. It's continuation. Every sound wants somewhere to live." The cylinder at my feet pulsed red now. The brine boiled without heat. I remembered the recorder's final warning. "Be outside the corridor when it peaks." The fork clattered to the floor, still vibrating. I lunged for it and struck again, this time harder. The tone exploded through the house like thunder underwater. Glass shattered in waves, windows imploding inward. The echo screamed, not in words but in memory. I saw the substation, the experiments, the lullaby being played to a chair that held my mother's silhouette. My father on the other side of the glass, whispering to the machine. "Just a little more." Then silence. The house exhaled so deeply it nearly took me with it. When I woke, it was dusk. The hum was gone. The air was flat, emptied. I walked to the window. Outside, the power lines swayed gently in the wind, humming an ordinary, indifferent tune. But when I pressed my palm to the wall beside me, I could feel a faint vibration, slower, softer. Not gone. Just sleeping. And in that pulse, faint as a heartbeat, a voice whispered, "Every echo needs a home." By morning the house pretended to be a house again. The floors had cooled, the pictures lay in glittered ruin, and my coffee tasted like coffee instead of a dial tone. I told myself the storm had passed. Then the doorbell rang 3 times in the exact rhythm the hallway once tapped under my feet. 2 men on the porch, city utilities, clipboards, reflective vests, the neutral smile of people who never expect a story worth hearing. "Ma'am, we're tracking interference on the feeder line. Your address is central to an oscillation event." Oscillation event. I almost laughed. I let them in. They stepped into the foyer and both paused, the way animals do before crossing an invisible border. One touched the wall, then yanked his hand back as if he'd brushed a low-voltage fence. "You feel that?" the younger asked. The older stared at the ceiling. "Harmonic. Like a substation capacitor is singing." They set up a handheld spectrum analyzer, the kind with a green waterfall display that turns radio into weather. Static rained down the screen. Normal. Then a narrow, elegant ridge rose at 7.83 Hz, the Schumann resonance, Earth's own heartbeat. But this ridge wasn't coming from the sky. It was blooming upward from my floor. "Could be ground loop," the older muttered, unconvinced. He moved toward the corridor. The analyzer flared. The ridge split into overtones like a comb. The house answered their instrument with a quiet, satisfied hum, the way a sleeping animal adjusts to a familiar footstep. "Let's pull the meter, isolate the service," he said. I surprised myself. No, the word came out too fast. "There's an old intercom in the walls. When you kill power, it loses memory." The lie tasted hot in my mouth. They exchanged a look, the quick professional math of risk versus paperwork. The younger took a step into the hallway. The analyzer squealed, then steadied. "Harmonics are stacking," he said. "Where's your breaker panel?" "In the basement," I answered, and the word basement scraped my throat like a swallowed coin. We descended the steps together. The concrete air remembered last night. The glass cylinder sat where I'd left it, liquid now clear as bone broth. The iron filings settled into a spiral at the bottom, like a fossilized whirlpool. The men didn't see the spiral. They saw the panel. They opened it. The house bristled. "Your neutrals are clean," the older said, almost disappointed. "No arsaing, no escorch. But look at this." He tapped a metal conduit that wasn't on their diagram. A slim, hand-soldered run that threaded away from the panel into the gap behind the masonry wall. Not code. Not modern. Very much my father. Previous owner DIY'd something, he said. I nodded like a person learning her own name. Previous owner. My father had never thought of himself that way. They started to trace the mystery line. I drifted to the far table and picked up the tuning fork. Cold. When I struck it against my palm, the tone that answered was almost shy. The analyzer's ridge brightened. The older man turned slowly. Ma'am, whatever that is, please. Too late. The house inhaled. The light didn't change. The weight of it did, growing thicker, as if photons had mass here. The analyzer waterfall flashed into a braided river, frequencies weaving into a rope. On the panel, every breaker label fluttered although the air was still. I felt the first footstep at the crown of my spine. Not on the stairs. In me. The younger technician grabbed my elbow. We're leaving. We reached the steps. The house tightened around the stringers until each tread felt like a lung I shouldn't step on. At the midpoint, the footsteps returned above us in the locked hallway, precise and patient, the same pattern that had raised me from sleep for weeks. 3, pause 2, pause 1. The older man whispered, "There's no one up there, right?" "There is," I said, and heard how true it sounded. We made it to the kitchen. The younger radioed dispatch, voice flattened into procedure. Possible hazardous frequency coupling. Requesting supervisor and power kill at pole. The word kill rattled the glassware. Cabinets clicked open and shut once, like a polite refusal. The older technician walked to the corridor threshold and stood there, hat in his hands as if before a casket. "Whatever your dad built, it's hungry," he said softly. "Harmonics don't stack themselves." He turned to me. "Did he ever talk to it?" "He called it the echo," I answered. "And he apologized to it when he thought I was asleep." The supervisor arrived with a second truck and heavier boots. They cut service at the pole. The lights died. The hum did not. It changed key. Without the grid to feed on, it reached lower, into the slow river that lives under all houses. Groundwater, bedrock, the old quiet. The analyzer, running on a battery the size of a paperback, went haywire. Then calm. Then drew a single line across its face. Not sound. Silence. The supervisor swore under his breath. "That's not possible." He stared at the corridor. "You've got a resonance chamber in there. Helmholtz cavity big as a room, tuned by a madman." He spoke like a man who'd seen substations explode and still believed in fences. I remembered the runes hidden as wiring diagrams, the hand-soldered conduit to nowhere, my father with his cardigan sleeves pushed up, drawing circles inside of squares until the draftsman paper went thin. Every sound wants somewhere to live. "What do we do?" I asked. "Seal it," he said. "Foam, mass-loaded vinyl, concrete." Or, he hesitated, then shook his head. "Or you do what your old man did. You sing back." That afternoon they left, promising permits and a plan. The house exhaled, pleased to have been witnessed. I sat alone on the corridor rug and pressed my ear to the floor. The echo pulsed, patient as a tide. When I closed my eyes, I could almost hear words in it. A child's game underwater. Syllables stretched into bubbles. I fetched the fork, the cylinder, the recorder. On the tape my father's voice was smaller now, as if the machine had lost faith. If you found this, you already heard it. Don't try to end it. Endings are just quiet beginnings." I didn't want a beginning. I wanted a door. At dusk the neighbor's wind chimes picked up the house's key and rang a chord I recognized from a memory I don't have. My mother's laugh at the edge of a storm. My hand shook so hard the fork blurred. I struck it anyway, not at the corridor, but at the photographs I'd rehung crookedly. The ones that still had glass. The sound threaded the frames, traveled their thin metal backs, and slid into the wall like a letter under a door. The footsteps started, above, below, within, then paused as if they too were listening. "I'm here," I said to the house that made me. "But I won't carry you. You'll carry me." The floor warmed under my palms. The corridor stretched, then narrowed, then settled, as if agreeing to a rule neither of us had said aloud. Outside, the pole transformer thumped twice, like a heart finding rhythm after a fright. When full dark fell, I turned off my lamp and waited. The hallway stayed locked. The footsteps came anyway, slow now, careful. They stopped just on the other side of wood and paint, and the line I wouldn't cross. And for the first time since my father died, I slept. In the last minute before sleep took me, the echo spoke, not with his voice, not with mine, but with the house's heavy, patient consonants. Keep counting. Keep time. Do not let me be the only one who remembers. I dreamed of blueprints that were prayers and prayers that were math. In the dream, memory had weight, and I was finally strong enough to lift it. Shall I continue with prompt 9/10? The night the lock fails, the footsteps cross the threshold, and the secret over the corridor reveals who has been walking there and why it chose me. It began with silence that felt deliberate, like the house was holding its breath, waiting for me to move first. For weeks, the footsteps had kept their distance, pacing politely behind the locked hallway door. But that night, the lock itself surrendered with a sound too soft to be metal. A sigh. The handle turned on its own. I was standing in the kitchen, hands deep in dishwater, when the click echoed down the hallway. The house shuddered, every nail and beam responding as if bracing for impact. I dried my hands and reached for the flashlight, though I already knew light wouldn't help. The corridor waited. The air inside was colder, not because of temperature but because it remembered more. The walls looked wet, but when I touched them, they were dry, just breathing, pulsing faintly with rhythm. The smell of ozone and cedar hung thick. "Dad," I whispered. The word came back layered, like multiple versions of me answering from different years of my life. I stepped forward. The walls shimmered in the periphery of the beam, their paint patterns crawling, aligning into faint etchings, the same diagrams from his notebooks. But this time they weren't drawings. They were active circuits, glowing with the low amber pulse of old life. The sound beneath it all was constant now, a heartbeat folded into harmony. At the far end, the door to the observation room, the one behind the glass chamber, stood open for the first time. I entered. The glass had mended itself. No cracks. The chair sat in the center, empty. The recorder lay where I'd left it, though its red light blinked again. I hadn't pressed record. The tape turned on its own. My father's voice filled the room. "It's not death that echoes, El. It's memory unclaimed." Behind me, the door sealed with a hiss. The hum deepened into something below hearing. My pulse synced with it before I could resist. The room tilted, not physically but in logic. The air thickened. Light bent around me. Then I saw her. At first just a shape, then a woman sitting in the chair, hands folded, head tilted the way I do when I listen too hard. Her hair gray, her dress plain. My mother, or what was left of her memory, built into resonance. Her lips didn't move. Her voice arrived the way scent does, through memory rather than air. "He tried to save me, Al. But every echo needs a host. He built me a home out of you." I couldn't breathe. The hum vibrated through bone, turning fear into music. "He thought love could erase pain," she continued. "It only stored it. When he died, the echo looked for balance." I looked around. The walls were blooming with light, every etching coming alive, circuits of amber and white. Energy flowed like veins through the structure. Then the footsteps. "Were me," she said gently, "trying to return what was never yours." The glass between us rippled. I stepped closer. My reflection doubled and split until I was standing beside her, then within her. For an instant, our silhouettes overlapped perfectly, the daughter and the echo that raised her. A memory I didn't know was mine surfaced. A storm outside, my father humming softly while soldering a wire, my mother's hum answering through static. The song had never ended, it just changed singers. The hum crescendoed. The walls bent inward. The circuits flared white. "You can't carry me anymore," she said. "You were only meant to remind him." The floor trembled. Somewhere in the distance, glass shattered, pipes burst, the whole house groaned in surrender. I shouted. "Then what am I supposed to do?" "Finish what he started." "And what echoes?" The glass dissolved into light. I fell forward, through her, into brightness so dense it sounded like wind. When I opened my eyes, I was lying in the front yard, dawn bleeding over the roofline. Smoke, or maybe steam, rose from the house's vents. The windows were opaque with condensation. The hum had stopped. I stood. My hands were warm, pulsing faintly with leftover vibration. The key from his Bible lay in the grass beside me, its surface blackened but unbroken. From inside the house came a final, solitary step, slow, deliberate. Then silence. For a full day after the house went silent, I didn't dare cross the porch. From the outside, it looked like a ruin halfway through deciding whether to collapse or rebuild itself. The windows fogged and cleared in slow breaths. The power lines above it swayed without wind, humming a tone just low enough to itch behind my teeth. By evening, curiosity, no obligation, pulled me back. If I left now, it would wait. Echoes always do. The lock gave no resistance. The air inside was still and wrong, as if someone had replaced the oxygen with memory. The wallpaper had shed its color. Every surface glowed faintly from within, like old embers that refused to die. My reflection followed me in the glass frames, even though I wasn't standing close enough to them. I found the key in my pocket, black and heavy, humming faintly. The one from his Bible. The one he must have kept close every day of his life, not as a symbol, but as a switch. There was only one lock left that fit it. The steel hatch in the basement, the one even my father avoided after the accident that took my mother. I followed the faint line of condensation on the walls until the steps descended into shadow. The hatch waited, its surface rusted but warm to the touch. When I pressed the key in, something in the house shifted. Timber groaning, plaster cracking like bone. The hum returned, distant at first, then wrapping around me like a pulse trying to remember rhythm. The door opened inward. Inside was a narrow chamber, the size of a confessional. The air tasted of salt and static. On the far wall hung a single mirror. No reflection, just depth. Beneath it sat the recorder, still running. Its red light blinked like a heartbeat. I hit play. My father's voice filled the chamber, softer now, trembling. "Elle, if you're hearing this, you opened the lock. Then I failed to protect you." He exhaled shakily. "Your mother wasn't supposed to die here. She was supposed to move through, to transfer. The machine was meant to hold consciousness in vibration, just for a heartbeat, to prove memory could outlive flesh. But the frequency held too long. It built its own pattern. It made her again. And it made you different." I froze. Every lullaby I sang to you in that house carried her echo. You learned to hear it before you could talk. You're part of what she became, Elle. That's why the house listens to you. That's why it waits. The tape crackled, warped, and then his final words. "You must decide, let the echo fade or feed it again." I couldn't. The recorder clicked off. The hum thickened around me, pressing against my chest like water. The mirror rippled. Inside it, faint outlines formed. A woman's silhouette first, then my own merging, splitting, pleading. "Don't end it," my mother's voice said, not through air but directly inside my bones. "We're not ghosts. We're continuity." I stepped closer. "Your unfinished noise. You never stopped." "Neither did he," she whispered. "Neither will you." I stared at my reflection until it blinked without me. A decision surfaced the way light does through deep water, slow but absolute. I raised the tuning fork, the same one that had shattered the circuit before. My hand shook, but I struck it once hard against the steel frame of the hatch. The sound that followed wasn't a note, it was a cleansing. Every frequency in the house screamed in unison, like a choir folding in on itself. The walls burst into dust. The hum dissolved into a single, perfect moment of nothing. Then quiet. When I opened my eyes, dawn filtered through a roof that no longer existed. The foundation steamed gently where the walls had been. The air was clean for the first time since I could remember. The recorder lay on the ground beside the broken key. I pressed play, but there was no sound. Only silence so deep it seemed to watch me back. I whispered, "It's over." From somewhere in the debris, a faint click answered. Not threatening, more like acknowledgement. I left the ruins without looking back. A week later, I moved into a small apartment 2 towns over. No vibrations. Just the ordinary noise of life. Refrigerators, neighbors, traffic. Sometimes late at night, when everything goes still, I think I hear it again, a step soft and patient just beyond the wall. But I tell myself it's memory. Because if it isn't, then the echo finally learned to walk without me. Sometimes silence isn't peace. It's the sound of something waiting. We spend our lives thinking echoes fade, that they belong to the past. But what if the past doesn't want to be forgotten? What if memory itself can learn to walk again? If you've ever felt your house breathe, if you've ever heard footsteps when you knew you were alone, maybe it wasn't fear. Maybe it was a reminder. This was every night. I heard footsteps in the locked hallway, until I discovered who they belonged to. If this story made you listen a little differently tonight, don't forget to subscribe, because what comes next might just change the way you think about what waits behind your own walls. Until next time, keep your lights low and your ears open.